No matter if you're using a smartphone or camera, taking great photographs of dogs can often be a bit of a challenge. Getting past the obvious challenges all starts with knowing what works well, and how to capture the best side of them, allowing their personalities to really come through. As a dog photographer, I face a lot of challenges and have to develop ways of getting the best, even from the most difficult of dogs. Even if they're your own dog, they might have different ideas to you photographing them that day. Throughout this video, we'll capture some shots both indoors and outdoors in the grounds of the house, and I'll be sharing some guidance and tips for how to get the best shots of your four-legged friend. Knowing your subject is the first thing. No matter what your photographic pursuit is, landscapes, portraits, wildlife, having a good understanding of what you're pointing your camera at is really important to getting the most out of your session. So if you're photographing your own dog, then you should have a better understanding of their likes and dislikes and habits and traits, which will make your life easier compared to photographing a dog you're not familiar with. Just make sure you use this insider knowledge to your advantage. I have 3 dogs, all different in what they like and what they do throughout their day around the house. So I know that Reno here, for example, loves to sleep in patches of sunlight that stream in through the windows during the day, and this makes a great shot of her and how she enjoys relaxing. As well as knowing your dog's personalities, you'll obviously know their physical appearance, which makes a big impact on our next subject, which is locations. As we're looking at shooting in and around the house, we'll split these 2 locations up as they'll photograph differently and require slightly different approaches. We'll take a look at photographing outside first, so in the garden or a quick snap or 2 on your daily walk. So we've come outside to our first location, which is just outdoors. Depending on your dog's coat, that will really dictate the type of location that you'll be shooting in. So for example, Tahoe here, she has quite a dark coat, so popping her out in the middle of a field on a bright sunny day is going to be quite difficult to get the camera to expose the scene correctly. You'll have to bias either the surroundings or the dog itself, as you're unlikely to get a balanced exposure between the 2. Yes, with a bit of editing, you can probably pull that back. If you're photographing a dog that does have a darker coat, one thing you can do is to use some tree coverage to really block out that sun a bit. So here we're using the trees just to bring some dappled light, which gives us a nice diffused lighting onto our subject. And that diffused lighting will just really help to pick out the dog against the background. This type of scene isn't good just for dark-coated dogs as well. In fact, woodland is one of my favourite places to photograph, especially in really bright light. So even if you have a lighter coloured dog like Reno, for example, then you're going to get good photos if you sit them in the right position as well. And woodland tends to be pretty good all year round. So even in winter, for example, when you don't have a strong light, obviously you're losing a lot of the foliage on the trees, so you're still getting that light come through. You can get some really good contrasty shots. One thing that I tend to do when I'm photographing either my dogs or clients' dogs as well, I tend not to use toys too much in the beginning. What I don't want is a load of shots with, for example, a ball in their mouth for the entire photo session. It kind of ruins the shots, and also it distracts them for the rest of the shoot. They're constantly wanting that ball, wanting to be rewarded for it. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't be rewarding the dog at all. So if you're asking them to do something, then getting them to sit or having a posed shot using something like a high value treat or even like a tuggy toy, that's a good way of rewarding them to get onto the next shot as well. So when I am out photographing dogs, I do like to get the more natural shots of them, so them exploring their surroundings and using their nose. But I also like those more focused and controlled moments as well. So we'll have a look at a few ways that we can really hone in on those more controlled shots. So we've already discussed the positioning of your dog to get the best out of the lighting. Now it's just getting the best out of the dog as well and the scene that they're in. So one thing that you really should be doing is positioning your dog away from any background. So if you're photographing them in your garden, for example, don't put them right up against the fence or the hedge. What this is going to do is create a very flat, very uninteresting image. So what you would do is position them as far away from it as you possibly can and shoot with the longest lens that you possibly can as well. So one of my favorites to use is an 85mm. It gives me a nice good aperture and a nice good reach and a good working distance away from my subject as well. So that greater working distance allows me to let the dog do what they're doing, so exploring the world around them, and for me to kind of keep that distance so I'm not interfering with what they're up to. That way I can get a lot more natural shots of them just being dogs. So if you're looking for that shallow depth of field look that something like an 85mm 1.8 will give you, but you only have access to something like a kit lens that has a much different variable aperture, then the best thing you can do is to position them as far away from that background as possible. By doing that, it will make that background look more out of focus, and use the longest length of that lens that you have available as well. So for example, if it's an 18 to 55, you would use a 55mm end. If you do have access to a longer lens like an 85mm or 135mm and something faster as well like f1.4 or 1.8, don't always opt for the fastest possible aperture that you can for that lens. Something like f2.8 or f4 will actually give you a much nicer depth of field and capture everything on the dog. You don't just want the eyes in focus. And as for focus points, you want to make sure that the eyes are sharp and in focus, as well as the nose. So one thing you're going to want to do as the photographer is to get as low to the ground as possible. You're at least going to want to get to your dog's eye level, as shooting down on your dog isn't going to give you a very good looking shot. So when you get down, that'll afford you a nice stylistic opportunity as well, and that is to push that background really out of focus, as we've mentioned a few times already. So getting down really low will also allow you to add a bit more foreground interest into your shot as well. So one thing I like to do is to put some grass or some foliage into the foreground without covering too much of the dog. And what this does is it adds a lot more depth to the image itself. So when you're down at that level and you have your dog positioned far enough away from the background and you're ready to start photographing, just check that background first to make sure there's nothing distracting that's going to really creep into the shot that you don't want there. So once you're comfortable and confident with capturing shots of your dog just exploring or some more pose shots, then you can do some experiments with things like framing or do some more abstract shots. And once that's all done, it's then time to head back indoors and you can capture some more photographs of your dog relaxing after their time outside. What you'll be looking to capture here are nice calm photos of your dogs. This is their time to relax and to switch off. As I mentioned with Reno, she loves to chill in the sun, and I know where the sun hits during the day, so setting up this shot should, in theory, be quite easy. When it comes to capturing this, I'll make sure the space is tidy from clutter. The area she's laying in is going to be comfortable for her as well. Then it's just a case of waiting for her to relax. You'll likely have less space indoors and less light too, so you'll need to get a bit more creative. Make use of the lights in the room. Just be careful with your white balance when mixing light temperatures, from your household bulbs to outdoors. As for additional lighting, I really don't agree with the use of flash with any animals, and because of this I would opt for continuous lighting if it's available, and if it's needed. If you don't have these lights, then a good reflector can go a long way with helping you to light your subject. Remember that if your dog isn't used to a pop-up reflector, this may scare them, so pop it up outside of the room and position it before they start to relax. Again, with angles, you'll want to get down low to capture a more interesting shot, and use an aperture that keeps as much of the dog's head in focus as possible. Finally, a few tricks on keeping your dog focused throughout the shoot. As I mentioned, try and avoid using a tool that you have to give them like a ball right until the end of the shoot. This doesn't mean you shouldn't be rewarding or keeping your dog focused. So if your dog is toy focused, then a tuggy toy works really well. If not, then some good treats. Depending on how well behaved your dog is, placing and positioning the treats or toys just off frame is a great way to get them to look in certain directions. You can also hold the treat or toy just above the camera for a more engaging shot, getting the dog to pay attention directly to you. I really do hope these tips and advice help you to capture some great shots of your four-legged friends in and around your home. And don't forget to share what you've captured. Thanks for watching.